I call on the order of the day for the address in reply debate.
Adjourn debate on the address in reply and the amendment proposed thereto.
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, firstly, as this is the first time I've had the opportunity to speak, can I congratulate you, Mr Speaker, on your reappointment as Speaker of the House. Can I congratulate your new deputy? And can I also, Mr Speaker, congratulate the two assistant speakers? And it's fair to say, Mr Speaker, since the speakers have been installed in the last week, I have had a number of New Zealanders approach me and raise the issue of the Honourable Trevor Mallard's appointment as Assistant Speaker, Mr Speaker. And I've been giving it some thought as to how I could explain such a venerable member of the House having the opportunity to becoming an Assistant Speaker and a presiding officer, Mr Speaker. And I decided the best way to explain it is that Trevor is the yin to Lindsay Tish's yang, Mr Speaker. And I think that's probably the best way we can raise it, Mr Speaker. The slightly different chalk to Lindsay's cheese, Mr Speaker. So, Mr Speaker, since I last had the opportunity to speak here, we've had an election. And, Mr Speaker, in that election campaign, it's fair to say that the opposition was resolutely focused, Mr Speaker. The opposition was resolutely focused on the issues that don't matter to New Zealanders, Mr Speaker. In a carefully spaced out campaign, and sometimes it did feel a little spaced out, Mr Speaker, we had a Matt McCartan special. First we had the Vote Positive slogan, which was the last time we saw anything positive from the Labor Party until election day, Mr Speaker. And the rest of the election campaign was brought to us by the letter B, by the books, by the blogger, and by a big Bavarian, Mr Speaker. And that big Bavarian did rather loom large over the election campaign. And then, of course, Mr Speaker, we had the moment of truth. The moment of truth. Remember the moment of truth. It quickly became, unfortunately, the moment of truth when it was discovered by the opposition too late in the day that bringing in 4 or 5 foreign, in quotes, dignitaries to tell New Zealanders how to vote 5 days later was perhaps a slight exercise in futility. And, Mr Speaker, we've seen again today that the opposition is still going at it. And can I say on behalf of the government benches, long may their approach last. Long may it approach last. May they bang on about bloggers right through until 2017, Mr Speaker. And actually, I don't want to say this, but perhaps a reference to Albert Einstein, a semi-paraphrase if you would. The definition of futility is repeating the same approach time and time again and expecting to get a different result. But never mind, Mr Speaker, because the cavalry is coming. The cavalry is indeed coming. The 4 horse people of the apocalypse, Robertson, Parker, Little and Mahuta, are riding to the rescue as we speak. Reasonably tortuous course, to be fair. They started off heading in the direction of Wellington, but they sort of took a dip to Nelson, then down to Dunedin, and I think they're going back north after that, Mr Speaker. And according to the Labor Party grandee, Brian Edwards, who I must admit I've never quoted before, they are cavorting around the country conducting a pillow fight, Mr Speaker. And he goes on to say that actually it is hard to be a Labor Party supporter, let alone a Labor Party advocate, when your team behaves like a flock of drunken sheep, Mr Speaker, which is slightly unfair, of course, but only slightly. Mr Speaker, the election campaign was a referendum, more than anything else, on how New Zealand was going in the world. And I think the result from New Zealanders was reasonably clear. And the reason for that, Mr Speaker, is that they have seen New Zealand performing relatively well compared to the rest of the world over the last few years. We've seen a big expansion in our economy relative to most OECD countries. We've seen tens and tens of thousands of jobs created in the last 12 months. In fact, the last fast labour market growth since 2004. Despite the manufacturing crisis, we've seen manufacturing and expansion now for some 25 months. Business confidence and consumer confidence has been very strong, and in fact, this month, business confidence has doubled again after the pre-election period. And probably most tellingly, Mr Speaker, Kiwis are voting with their feet and staying in this country. Our cost of living increase is pretty low. The latest figures have come out and actually said that the cost of living increased just 1% in the last year. And that means after-tax wages are definitely rising faster than inflation, when prior to the GFC that was the other way around. Our mortgage interest rates are just off 50-year lows, house building is up, and we've got our balance of payments deficit down, Mr. Speaker. So it's actually now about what's going to happen over the next few years. And I, for one, are very strongly positive about New Zealand's future. And I'd like to take a moment, Mr. Speaker, to talk about a couple of sectors of the New Zealand economy that are actually doing very well despite the story of a high New Zealand dollar, and that is the ICT sector and our high-tech manufacturing sector. There's a lot of talk in New Zealand about the, in quotes, need for diversification. There's a lot of talk from various opposition politicians from time to time that somehow it's as if all we do all day is ship low-quality products offshore, which I have to say is a little insulting to companies all around the country. But actually the truth of the matter is that whether you're talking about the primary sector or the high-tech sector, the level of innovation in New Zealand is actually quite stunning. And we saw last week that New Zealand's top 100 companies in the technology sector reached for the first time $7.6 billion in turnover, which has been a $1 billion increase in the last 5 years. So during the GFC, during the struggles of Christchurch, and a number of these companies are located in Christchurch, and some of them had to change premises and so on. So during all that period, and with a high New Zealand dollar, their turnover in New Zealand dollar terms has gone up by a further $1 billion. And they now export nearly 3/4 of their entire annual revenues. So we're seeing very big growth and very encouraging growth in the sector. And we are seeing the diversification that New Zealanders often talk about, Mr. Speaker. And the thing that's really driving all of that is R&D and innovation, and that's what we're seeing more of, and that's what this government is very much truly supporting, Mr. Speaker. So that's encouraging, but actually the story of innovation is much, much wider than that. And I recall, again, prior to the election campaign, I think it was one of the Greens co-leaders saying New Zealand's primary sector needs to innovate. He actually said it just before the field days occurred in the Waikato. And as I was travelling around field days, the number of highly offended farmers that wandered up and said, this guy needs to come just once to field days and have a look at what's going on in this country. Because farming, by definition, actually these days, is a data-driven industry. That's what's going on, Mr. Speaker, and I think that's been one of the challenges for the opposition, is they failed to get out much in the last 3 years, and as a result have not seen what's actually happening. So as we look forward, Mr. Speaker, we have to ask ourselves at this time, as we look at the address and reply, what is New Zealand's future all about? How do we make ourselves successful? And Mr. Speaker, this government believes that New Zealand's future is all about boosting our connectivity internationally, about taking our advantages of our opportunities on the world stage, about backing our businesses to get out there and succeed in a globalised world, Mr. Speaker. And one of the things we're very passionate about is opening up markets for our exporters, giving our companies, which we rate and we back, the opportunity to sell in markets all over the world, because we know if they get that opportunity on an equal footing, they will succeed. And that's why we're in favour of such things as TPP. That's why we're in favour of doing a deal with Korea. That's why we're in favour of the WTO's government procurement agreement, because it gives our companies the opportunity to show that we can foot it in much bigger markets in the world, Mr. Speaker. We also are going to continue to increase our investment and support of innovation, Mr. Speaker, and continue it. There has been some criticism of the idea of backing businesses with research and development support. But let's remember, Mr. Speaker, that New Zealand companies have to go offshore before they are out of nappies, that they do need some assistance to get themselves started on the world stage. And once they get started, they get out there and really kick along, Mr. Speaker. We also need to keep focused on skills and capital, and we need to remember that in this day and age, both of those are portable, Mr. Speaker, and a responsible government will look to provide the settings that encourage people to locate themselves in this country, that encourage people to invest in this country. And Mr. Speaker, that's what New Zealanders saw during the election campaign, and that's why they voted in support of this government, Mr. Speaker. And right across the board, including our infrastructure space, and the involvement we've taken with natural resources is very important. Mr. Speaker, this country's business sector, from small businesses to big businesses, saw a very important thing during the election campaign, and a very big contrast. One second, Mr. Speaker. Between the two sides, this government was all about what we could do to encourage business, and the opposition was unfortunately all about what they could do to business. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chris Hipkins.